Go ahead, Elsie. There we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are honored that you've decided to join us this Wednesday afternoon, the last Wednesday of November. Hard to believe that time was just zooming on by. So let's just press pause. Let's just take a moment, take a breath, maybe close the eyes and just give thanks to whatever goodness is happening in your world, in your neck of the woods today. There's always something, always something to be thankful for. So we give thanks to Creator for the gift of this day. As the sun rose in the east, it was a reminder that we do not walk alone, that we've been given another gift from Creator. And so we hope we're making the most of it today. And so we're here at Innovate BC. We welcome you, that this is an opportunity to learn, to take in the knowledge that's being served to us today, and an opportunity to engage in some dialogue. So we're just thankful for this opportunity that we can meet here on this webinar, our beautiful Cando family. Today is Innovate BC. So we just pressed pause, took a deep breath, close the eyes, acknowledge the goodness that is in your life. So we say, thank you, Creator. All right. So today's Innovate BC is in partnership with Co-operatives. First, we got Trista, who is the Indigenous Relations Director, I believe. She is here. Director of Indigenous Relations with Co-operatives first. And she's in Saskatchewan, but she's just here to cheer on our guest speaker. And our guest speaker is Dave Moore, who's joining us from BC, the great town of Kamloops. So we welcome you, Dave. So a little bit about what today's webinar is about. It is the River Select Fisheries Cooperative. So Dave is going to just inform us what's happening there. This was incorporated in 2014 and it was created by a business cluster of Indigenous community fisheries in BC who have decided to work together to streamline fishery logistics, processing, and marketing, making it more efficient for everyone to invest in their local fisheries and grow into the value chain. You know, love collaboration, love partnership, love when people get together and bring their ideas and their good energy and their economics really together. So this fishery creates more value and sustainable, preserve local fish populations, and to remain competitive with large-scale fisheries. So the cooperative members are not only the fishers, but the fishing communities and their enterprises that support them. So the River Select Fisheries Cooperative is helping build vibrant and prosperous Indigenous communities through local, self-regulated and integrated fisheries businesses led by First Nations. So that is very, very important. I love to hear vibrant and prosperous Indigenous communities. Love to hear that. So we're really delighted, honored, Dave, that you've decided to be with us this afternoon for about an hour. I think the most captivating of your bio was at the very beginning, that you have 43 years experience as a fisheries technician and community development with more than 30 Indigenous communities, organizations, and their fisheries around the world. So we're bringing an expert to the table today. We're honored that you're here. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Use that chat box throughout. Let us know where you're joining from. We always love to hear where our family's joining from. Also, throughout the presentation, feel free to put some questions in the chat box, and then there will be opportunity for more questions and dialogue at the end of today's presentation. Finally, this is my favorite thing to say after I introduce the guest speaker, but there will be an evaluation link sent to you at the end of today's presentation, and you will also get the copy of today's presentation as well. Now, with that evaluation link, we love to hear from you. We love your feedback. And when you fill that in, your name will be entered to win a draw, and we do the draw at the end of the month. for a $500 Visa gift card. So I think that's amazing. So we love to hear from you. So fill out that evaluation link. All right. So enough about me, enough about my talking. Let's get down to business, why we are here. I'm passing this virtual mic off to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and to the Cooperatives First team. I'm honored to be here today. I'm going to talk about kind of an introduction, first of all, to our Fisheries Cooperative. It was based in British Columbia. Its purpose, its origins, forms and functions, and the outcomes. And I'll spend about 15 minutes doing that, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. So can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Yes, okay, good. I was wondering for a second there. All right, so my name is Dave Moore. I'm the business manager for the River Select Fisheries Cooperative and our program called Authentic Innovation, Authentic Indigenous Seafood. Tip of our hat to our program partners. We've been on quite a journey for the last couple of decades, and we certainly didn't do this on our own. As Michelle mentioned, we've got lots of partners, lots of people who put a lot of time and energy into making things work. So I appreciate all of our support. There's a bit of a preamble. According to Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the annual value of Canada's seafood industry is an estimated $6.6 billion annually and employs 72,000 people. Indigenous fishing communities represent only about 2.5% of the income and 4.2% of the employment in Canada's fisheries. And that's primarily just through seasonal fishers. And we set out to change that. We do share a common problem. Global competition for limited seafood resources has marginalized many local fishing communities, threatening the survival of aquatic biological diversity, as well as the food and the livelihoods of Indigenous communities who depend on their local fisheries. There we go. We incorporated in British Columbia in 2014. We needed the scale of multiple fisheries to be able to compete in global seafood markets. The local decision-making and branding is paramount to our identity and our function. The founding members representing 32 First Nations communities from 5 nations, the Okanagan or Syilx, the Northern Secwepemc, the Carrier-Sicani, Chilcotin, and Stolo. We were born out of the 8 river fisheries that came to the table to collaborate, involving 3 founding commercial fishing enterprises owned and operated by Indigenous communities in British Columbia. We have 5 staff: a business manager, myself, production manager, a marketing manager, a co-op developer, an accounting and inventory manager, and a variety of salaries and contract positions. We have 5 directors and includes executive director and treasurer. And all the directors are Indigenous or from the Indigenous fishing enterprises. My slideshow is moving slowly. There we go. So we started with river branding. We were organized by First Nations who, I had to open up some of my screen. We're organized by First Nations to help restore their salmon fisheries after 100 years of being marginalized by a growing mechanized industry in the Pacific region in the early 1900s. Our development has been supported by a modern policy shift to reduce marine mixed stock interception of salmon that was leading to the decline of stock diversity in British Columbia. Modern salmon fisheries needed to be more selective, targeting the most productive stocks and leaving the less productive stocks to spawn and to get back to their river origins and the people who depended on them. Salmon stock diversity also provides the intra-species vitality to withstand impacts like climate change. Bear with me for a couple of minutes and we'll give you a bit of a background video on that.
Okay, this one? Yeah. Thank you.
To save some of BC's endangered salmon species, we know we have to move a percentage of the salmon harvest from the marine fisheries on the coast towards in-river and lake areas where we can more accurately monitor the harvest of species that are at risk.
I think one thing we could do is go to more terminal fisheries so we can have a better picture of what's there and what isn't there. From that, we could look after the fish in a way, because we could judge how much is coming back.
The overfishing of these weaker, endangered stocks of salmon is a solvable problem. We need to harvest fewer fish in these marine mixed stock areas that happen along the coast and in the lower reaches of the larger river systems like the Skeena and the Fraser, and move our harvests closer to the spawning grounds, where we can actually focus on known, healthier populations of salmon runs and reduce the damage to the endangered species.
Because it's what we do here. We live off of our fish here. All year round, we live off of our fish here. And if they get overfished, what is our grandchildren going to have, right?
If we're going to protect the ecosystems of our rivers, lakes, and oceans, as well as the livelihood of the people who work them, if we want salmon to be part of our future, we have to change the way we fish.
So our journey, that gives a bit of a background to the origins of our journey. And many of us that built the cooperative were involved in stock assessment, stock restoration work with First Nations around these major BC rivers before we got to the point where there was an opportunity to begin restoring some of the economic fisheries. The vision back then was to try and buy back some of these licenses that weren't operating because of harvest restrictions in the marine environment, and to move them back to the rivers of origin, breaking them up into their constituent parts and fishing them in the places closer to where they come from. We spent about 5 years and some 27 First Nations led workshops to develop a vision document called River to Plate. And the purpose of that long dialogue was to get a better understanding of if First Nations wanted to move forward with commercialization of their fisheries and how they wanted to move forward. In the early days, the chiefs of the Fraser River, for example, weren't even sure they wanted to commercialize their fisheries. In many of their minds, there was an opinion that, and a valid one, that the decline and the loss, in fact, of some of their local fisheries in the headwaters of some of these major river systems was caused by the industrialization of fisheries. So our original vision was to promote the inland salmon fisheries, the river fishing cultures, and the high quality, natural, wholesome salmon that's produced as certifiably sustainable, healthy, and good value. We built a code of conduct for responsible trade, respecting the care, the handling, and the welfare of the salmon foremost, reflecting the sound stewardship and food safety in the fishery above all. We call that our Charter for Responsible Trade, and out of our charter, we created a society called the Inland Salmon Producers Association to build methods and standards, things like best practices, monitoring, traceability, certification, brand stewardship, that kind of thing. And then we created the River Select Fisheries Cooperative for the business side of our growing vision. Things like logistics, business planning, marketing, and sales. And we work for the commercial fishing enterprises, both members and clients. We worked our way through the myth that salmon caught from the rivers in British Columbia are of poor quality. And we began to change the way people looked at the river fishery. And that wasn't always people that were concerned about about whether these fish were edible and valuable, but it also meant we needed to create controls and systems so that they weren't improperly exploited, weren't driven into worse problems. Some of the early fisheries were entirely just targeting the caviar and developing large international export markets for caviar. And the carcasses, when I first began this work, I was seeing piles of carcasses 5 feet high on the gravel bars all over the lower Fraser River. And people said, well, they're only good for their caviar. We decided we needed to change that. So we developed our shared brand, and our brand was about promoting the locally branded river wild salmon from Indigenous communities around the province. Our first cluster of fisheries, as I mentioned, were from the major rivers around British Columbia. We developed their logos and their labels and their brand identities with them. We hired graphic artists and marketers and began to put together a program that would help promote and develop the fisheries and the products that would best represent those fisheries, emphasizing that these were by design sustainable, selecting only the strong stocks, and protecting the food security and the culture of the communities where these salmon come from, above all. We developed standardized labeling that met the needs of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, so we could access markets domestically, but also to meet standards for export markets, so that we had maximum market access for our products. In the bottom left-hand corner of the label, you'll see a QR code. It says "Trace this fish." It provides the opportunity for our customers to find out where their food comes from. By scanning the QR code, it gives a guarantee of the origins of the fishery, the First Nations fishing enterprise, where they were harvested, who was involved in that enterprise, what those fisheries were like, their story behind those fisheries, their conservation stories, and their art and their history, and the kinds of things that would bring a better understanding to the consumers of where their food was coming from, where their seafood was coming from. There's a link from the guarantee that brings the people to the customers to these stories, and there's a framework that provides a background on our river branded products that link the markets to those local fisheries. Things like the location and the most significant feature of the fishery, the mission, traditions, and so forth. We began developing a variety of products under initially a frozen format, things like fillets and wild candied salmon, smoked salmon and caviars, that kind of thing. We began to expand then into shelf-stable products, retorts and cans and dried and that kind of thing. We began innovating to try and provide the kinds of products that would best reflect the traditional foods and the traditional ways of preparing these unique products from the communities and the fisheries of origin. We collaborated around and in a partnership with DFO, we rebuilt the historic Nelson Brothers Cannery into a logistics center. We kept the original sign and adopted the name Paramount Fisheries in Steveston Harbor in Vancouver. This provided us a springboard to access the markets. It's about 12,000 square feet of logistics. About half of that is freezer, cold storage, and the other half is secure dry storage. And we contract the operation of that facility out to a company called Organic Ocean. And whenever our space isn't being used, Organic Ocean uses that space. So we've got a really good joint venture going with them. The interesting note on this particular piece of our puzzle was that it took us a few years to get the processing companies in British Columbia to work with us and to see that we weren't necessarily competition. And as their fisheries began to decline as well, they had processing space available, so that they were more and more open to processing our custom processing our products for us and applying our labels and so forth. But where they drew the line was they weren't going to store our products, and they certainly weren't going to market our products, and they certainly were not going to distribute our products to the marketplace. So this particular pilot has been one of our most significant steps forward, and we're looking to encouraging others to develop such facilities across the country. A big piece of what we do is financing these fisheries. Fishing communities generally lack the cash flow to buy their own fish catch from their own fisher's catch. The banks won't lend cash for fish purchases. And the return on investment takes up to 3 years after value adding versus a cash purchase, which most fishing communities are used to for the fresh catch. And so that's a significant departure from the contemporary fish trade around the world. And so we needed community economic development enterprises working at the community levels to take the risk and the burden from the fishers that tended to prefer the quick cash. So we've been encouraging these commercial fishing enterprises to work with their local economic development enterprises and to provide the cash flow and the support to cover the value add costs and to hold the investment over the next year to 2 years before all of the return on investment has come to fruition. Our own members' equity was used originally and to date, but we're beginning to develop more flexible models where we can have a more scalable system of securing loans to support these First Nations fisheries. One of the most interesting things that we did early on in our development was supply chain engineering, price mapping, value chain mapping. And it's sort of one of the first and most fundamental steps in getting into the value chain. And so when we initially work with the community in their fishery, the first thing we do is we profile their fishery. We begin to advise on products that they can develop with their harvest. And it gives the opportunity for the community to see the whole value chain. So there's an opportunity to invest up the value chain and move beyond just the harvest, or in this case, you can see at the top of the pyramid here is the procurement. And through that value chain, you can see there's the landing, what is spent on landing costs, the processing, production logistics, the wholesale markup, everything all the way to the manufacturer sales, MSRP, the recommended retail price. For a sockeye fillet today is, when this was done, was about $20. With that information, we then began to engineer the product and the pricing. And as we worked our way through these things, we're able to look at comparable products and if we're under or over, to be able to make adjustments. But all along the value chain, there's a lot of moving parts. So we developed business models that enabled us to model out the outcomes as we tried different products and different markets. The models generate a dashboard, which you were just seeing. That was a sort of generic dashboard. Within that model is a central sort of a piece that helps the fishing enterprise see the total cost of their fishery, the total sales, the profit margins, the investment, return on investment, and so forth. As a key part of our growth as well, we wanted to move away from the somewhat dysfunctional trade environments that involved brokers and buyers that were knocking on doors in our communities in the middle of the night with suitcases of cash and trying to coerce people to sell their fish to them. And what we found is that there was a lot of conflict between fishermen, between fishers' families, between even communities. And we wanted to find a way to change that. So we developed the Sustainable Seafood Market Cooperative. The key to the market cooperative is an online bidding platform that enables us to put forward the available production, sometimes in advance of the fishery, so they can be bid on. We register currently about 300 companies and bid on the process. We register, as I say, about 300 companies now. We put out a product offering that shows a picture of the product, identifies where it was caught, who was caught, again, guaranteeing it comes from a licensed fishery, all of those kinds of things. There's a set amount of time for companies to submit their bids. Upon the deadline, we review the bids, summarize them, and then present them to the local community fishing enterprise, who then takes has the opportunity then to choose which buyer they prefer. So they still are in control of who they're selling to, but this provides a greater degree of transparency and a more competitive approach and more transparent approach than having somebody show up your door with a suitcase full of cash and a big smile. Early in our development, as I mentioned, we were focused on the salmon fishery, but declining river salmon fisheries could not sustain the co-op alone, leading us to expansion into marine fisheries and new clients, Indigenous clients across Canada. I've got a picture here of Pangertung Fisheries. This is one of our most farthest reaching client on Baffin Island. Pangertung Fisheries is an amazing Indigenous community with a very significant fishery. They fish some 1.2 million pounds of turbot through a kilometer of ocean, through 2 meters of ocean ice, and they hand line these fish up through the ice. They built their own processing plant, and for years they were selling to international markets, wholesale commodity markets, the raw material. But they began to build a vision to value add their products, to brand their products, and to sell them to domestic markets and increase the value. They were exporting a lot of raw material for somebody else to invest in, very similar to everybody else that we've been working with. So we conducted feasibility studies as we began to shift our journey to authentic Indigenous seafood. And to demonstrate that our work was relevant, we found that our work was relevant in the Arctic and the Atlantic and Central Canada's big lakes as it was here in the Pacific region, and for the same reasons. Seafood was being harvested and sold to global commodity markets in raw form for others to invest in. The status quo was supporting seasonal fishers and incentivizing more and more intensive fishing, just like in the salmon fishery. Some call it the race to the bottom, as everybody's chasing slim profit margins and having to fish more fish to try and make a living, even if it was a seasonal living at that. It was replacing food, cultural, and economic security with quick cash, undervaluing the resource, and sometimes even harming local fish ecosystems. Our business model, it turned out, worked everywhere. Our feasibility study identified most Indigenous communities were in fact employing seasonal fishers. And we found 87 Indigenous commercial fishing enterprises across Canada, 6 fish processing plants, usually a joint venture, but there were some small seasonal fish plants owned and operated by First Nations. We found 18 of the 87 reported value adding and branding. But we found when we began to look for inventories, only 5 were active or had some inventory in the last year, and only 3 of those were our own. So we felt that there was certainly a market for us to expand into, and concluded that most of the Indigenous harvest was being sold to commodity export markets in its raw form, and communities didn't have the capacity or the opportunities, so the cash flows, whatever it took, to invest in their own fisheries. And we wanted to change that. Our updated business goal is to develop shared supply chains and market access for authentic Indigenous seafoods and assist community investment into their fisheries, including the infrastructure necessary to optimize the environmental, economic, and social viability of their fisheries. Some of the benefits of local branding and value adding of these Indigenous fisheries includes fostering a local stewardship and ecological sustainability by protecting local fish populations, habitats, and fishing cultures just as they have for thousands of years. It enhances profits and viability of the local fishing enterprise. It provides more profits, requiring less fish to reduce pressure on local aquatic ecosystems. It improves the trade environment, less conflict, better working conditions, etc. And protects the food, culture, and economic security of these fisheries. Looking forward, authentic Indigenous seafood is currently our program. I suspect in the next 18 months, we'll see a shift of our corporate identity from River Select to authentic Indigenous seafood. We've been averaging about 30% growth annually as a cooperative. We supply major restaurants in Vancouver, Toronto, and Hong Kong currently. We have retail markets. That's our fastest growing sector. We've been negotiating export markets for our surplus value-added products, replacing commodity markets for raw materials with locally branded Indigenous seafood products. Our supply chain collaboration is expanding across Canada, adding new locally branded fisheries every year. But we're promoting regional producer cooperatives at the gateway to Canada's major commercial fisheries, as I mentioned, in the Arctic and the Atlantic and Central Canada, and local cooperatives, fishers cooperatives in the communities where these fisheries really operate. We don't want to become a big centralized company in Canada. What we're looking for is to develop the capacities for Indigenous communities to define their own vision, their own way forward, and to follow the lead of these initial activities to try and build value into their fisheries and sustain their fisheries and look after their fisheries. And finally, to continue to foster this return to more local artisanal fisheries as a solution to overfishing of global seafood resources. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave, for your presentation. I have a comment here in the chat box. Too many tasty looking pictures of salmon treats. His mouth is still watering. And so he's saying thank you for the presentation. Really good presentation. We're going to open it up, everybody, for any questions that you might have. Feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to put it in the chat box. It was really interesting. I particularly like, and I wrote it down, I liked what you had to say. It's about developing capacities for Indigenous communities. And I think that that's important. It's kind of building on what's there and just helping and supporting you know, this market, which is so excellent. So any questions out there? So there's a few questions about why would it be important? Why choose a co-op?
That is an excellent question. In fact, as we hired co-op developers, and I mentioned we had some partner sponsors. Van City was one of our early sponsors. They took us under the wing. And frankly, if you're a co-op bank, you're nobody if you don't have a pet fisheries cooperative. And Van City's been just wonderful to us. They've helped us from the sparkle in our eye, our initial ideas beginning, and they hired one of the best co-op developers in the country, and actually a couple of them, and they helped us think through whether and how we wanted to commercialize our fisheries. What would the businesses look like? And they presented all kinds of different business models, but the one that resonated most with our Indigenous leaders was a co-op model. In fact, in other words, Indigenous communities are probably closer to a co-op model than any other kind of business model.
Okay, so how has the co-op changed things for the members? I think that that's really important, the membership, and what are some of the good things that have arose out of this? Sure.
Well, one of the most significant things was the co-op enabled a number of communities to work together to pay for the organization of the logistics and the business planning support and the tools and the service accounts and all of those things you need to organize, prepare to move into the value chain. In the absence of that, one small scale fishery in a remote community has a really hard time ascending into that value chain and doing all of these things themselves. And so one by one, they're all susceptible to that broker that shows up at their door with a suitcase full of money, and that's promoting the best deal they're ever going to get. And really what they're doing is they're buying these fish at rock bottom prices. And the only way some of these communities have access to move their fish from the riverbank or the lake bank or the ocean bank is they need the totes and the ice and the trucks. They need to get them to a processor within hours, and then the processor, from the processor and into products and packaging. All of those things is just too much for a small fishing enterprise. And so over the last 100 years, the industry has given rise to these vertically integrated companies that own and control everything except the harvesting itself. So often these big fish companies own the licenses, they own the boats, they practically own the fishermen. And it leaves very little opportunity for the community to break loose and get control over their fishery and squeeze more value and more benefit out of the value chain.
I see. One thing I liked about your presentation was that QR code. Was it track your fish, and that you could go and see the history? I just thought that was really great, really great. So what would be some of the upcoming goals for the co-op? If you could let us know, give us some insights.
Yeah, really, really good question. Our biggest effort right now is to develop a share system and to open up our membership. And the reason for the share system is, as I mentioned, it's a bit of a nuance in our business plan, but securing the financing to support these communities to invest in their own fisheries. I mean, they've got to buy the fish from their fishermen. The fishermen have a hard enough time paying for their gear and their boat and the gas and the food and everything to get ready for a fishery, and then they take all of the risk. And so it was inappropriate. We found time and again, it was inappropriate to expect the fishermen to just hang on just 18 months and you'll get your money back. It just didn't work that way. And sometimes buyers will provide kind of an incentive, something they call a bonus once they've sold all the fish. And many of the buyers promised this. And in many occasions, we found the buyers never showed up again. And so we've been using our members to secure the loans that we needed in order to finance the fisheries. But as we grew to a point of, we started to grow out of our clothes, if you will, we couldn't afford to finance any more fisheries. And so we needed more tools. So we've been in discussions with Van City about ways of doing that, but it's been our co-op developers that have been creating for us a share system. And the share system as it stands, and it's still in work in progress, but we should have this out the door within the next few months, involves two types of shares. One type of share is as we develop the products and the markets, we're getting pretty strong market pull, and we buy the raw materials from the community fishery. We design their logos, labels, packages, all those things I described. They own their brand. But we finance their fishery, we purchase their raw materials, we invest in all of the products, and out comes the other side are these market-ready, customer-ready products. Now, if the community, typically what happens is a community will watch for 2 or 3 years. And we're at that stage now where the communities are looking at and we show them the business models. They also own the business models I was showing you with the data that keeps getting refreshed with each year's fishery. So really valuable, really detailed insights into how the economics of their fisheries work, which is something else brokers and buyers will never provide to an Indigenous community. So they'll watch for 2 or 3 years typically. And then what we're seeing is they're coming back to us and saying, hey, we want some of that. How do we get a share of our fishery? We say, well, it's the first and foremost principle is it's yours if you want it. And if you want to buy 50% of the cost of bringing it to the market ready product stage, then you get 50% of the products that come out of that market. And so they're loving that because they then have the flexibility. They want to buy 5% or 10 or 50 or 100%. They always have the first choice. And if there's a shortfall in the financing, we now have a tool so that other fishing enterprises can buy the difference. And that's working really well. For example, for the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance, they have a fishing enterprise called UFish. And UFish has been restricted in fishing for going on 4 years now because of the collapse of in the Fraser Canyon. and the inability for many of the salmon stocks to get upstream without a lot of investment and help to get them there. Now the populations are starting to rebuild, but youth fish hasn't been able to have a harvest in 4 years. And so this model has given them the ability to invest in another fishery in some other place where they see good profit margins and a good return on their investment. The second kind of investment share we're building is a share of the fishery. So many of our community fisheries have a lot of moving parts to them, and they may not be, of course, just salmon. They may involve cod or ground fish or a variety of species. And so when we invest in their fishery, we're investing in all of these moving parts, all of these pieces with all range of profit margins. And so when we summarize all of that, there's a sort of summary profit margin there. So they have the ability and an interest in investing in that fishery as a whole, as opposed to just buying a product. And with the same principle, if they invest in 50% of the value of producing the fishery, then they can get 50%. They would get 50% of the profits of that fishery. And what's really interesting about this piece of the story that's not immediately obvious is when we did our feasibility study a couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago now, we were coming back to the communities where we were doing the business profiling and modeling, and we'd say, all right, we've got your model ready. Here's what we've discovered. And we're looking at 30 to 45% profit margins where they were always losing money in the past from just selling the raw material. And they would go, that's really interesting. We really like that. Boy, you guys have done excellent work. We love this, but we're not really sure our chiefs are ready to make the investment right now. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board and said, now what do we do? We're pulling our hair out, like, what could be wrong? What are we doing wrong? And then we thought, you know what? If the community can't afford or isn't ready to take the risk, why don't we offer to do it for them? We make sure still that it's their brand, it's their products, everything. They own everything except the product that we produce until they buy it. And so that gives them the opportunity, as I said earlier, to watch, to see how it unfolds, to build the confidence after 2 or 3 years. And as we build the markets, they start to build that confidence with us. And so it's through that process that we came to this conclusion that we really need this kind of financing machine in place so that Indigenous communities have the opportunity to invest in their fishermen and their fisheries.
Thank you. Before I ask my final question, anybody else want to come on in and ask a question?
Yes, Ken, I've got a question. The final price of $19. Now, if that salmon or a portion of that salmon was converted to a canning operation, would that reduce that price? And would that be of a benefit to the seller or to the fisheries or the fishers? The fishermen, because they're only getting $3 as I read that pyramid. $3 to $19, that's a big spread. So would a canning operation, number one, be able to get less waste and reduce the final selling price? And I realize that may not be one of the goals. I mean, so anyway,
actually,
just a question.
Thanks, Ed. It's actually an excellent question, and it's what we're all about. Just going back to, so folks might want to recall this value chain graph here, and the answer is yes. In fact, when we build these models that I was showing, bring to the front here, there it is. So this is a generic model. I kind of fuzzed it a bit because it is confidential information from one of our Indigenous fisheries. And when we build these models, we have the whole range of products that may be produced or considered at the initial stage of profiling the fishery. Once we've assessed the fishery, the different kinds of raw materials that are being produced, we then look at the different products which could be produced from that fishery. And then we engineer into the business model the revenues and expenses so that the community can make an informed choice whether they want to, maybe they still want to sell it all as headed and gutted frozen product, or, as opposed to just selling it whole round, or maybe they want to make fillets, or Maybe they want to make a smoked can product, or one of our most popular products, popular selling products these days is a shelf-stable candied salmon. And it sells really well, it markets really well because it's shelf-stable, and small stores and gas stations are now displaying it on their countertops. And so given our experience and our market poll, we're able to show the fishing enterprises the range of the products and pluck out those products that are best suited to their fishery. And then they make the choice, the business choice, which products. And often it's not just one. And it's particularly of interest is it's the products that are the least valuable that are making the most money. I know that that's counterintuitive, but for our team, when people start talking about fresh, ocean bright, Chinook and sockeye, we want to go running, screaming into the hills. The profit margins are really slim. The global seafood markets has become unduly enamored with the whole idea of fresh fish. And so they're buying fresh fish in a competitive, exorbitant price level from fishermen for a very short period of time. Then they're shipping them to Seattle or sometimes to Japan. And it's really hard on fisheries. It's hard on fishermen. It's hard on supply chains. And, somewhere in Japan, somebody's eating a Chinook salmon caught on the coast of British Columbia 3 days earlier. That is not ecologically sustainable. And so we not only advise on price points and profit margins, but we advise on things that are responsible trade. How to best utilize and invest in their fishery to utilize or generate the products that are going to produce the best outcomes for their fishery. And if it happens to be fillets, it's fillets. But what we've done is we've gravitated towards, you saw our early origins were about these terminal river salmon fisheries where everybody thought the fish were inedible. Now we're buying these fish at remarkably low prices. We're investing in them and getting 30 to 45% profit margins in a fresh salmon if you can handle those complex supply chains and you can keep fishermen alive long enough to beat them up to supply these short-term fisheries and keep them around. The profit margins are, as you can see from the value chain there, are really slim. And so the final sort of nuance in your question was how do the fishermen get these other profits? Well, it's important to see that the fishermen, pardon me, there's the fisherman there, say $3 a pound. That's for a fresh round sockeye. There's a little slim piece in there. There's not a number there to go with it, but that's the landing cost. And each of these are incremental numbers. This isn't a cost for processing. You can see that the cost of this fish went from $3 to $8.65 from processing. And you can see the bulk of that is the processing cost. And then above that is the production logistics. That's getting it from the processor through in packaging and labeling and all of those kinds of things. And then there's the wholesale markup, which covers the cost, in our case, of the co-op. Then there's the storage and handling. There's almost $1 worth of storage and handling. And there's broker fees, marketing fees. As a fisherman, you can't say, sorry, I'm not going to pay a broker to sell this. I'm not going to pay for storage and handling. You can't get rid of any of these things. And so what we do is we design the final products, which does have a profit margin in it. And as I mentioned, then, I mean, if the fisherman can afford to wait 18 months and invest all this money to get to here, then they get the profit margin that goes with it. So our job is to help the communities get as far up this value chain as possible. And as they look at this value chain, and in this area here, some folks are saying, look at the amount of income that's coming out of this or from this fish. And they say, we want to invest, therefore, in a processing plant if they've got enough people to provide the labor in the processing plant. Or, we want to develop a storage and handling facility because there's a buck there. And then you've got to do the business modeling to figure out, there may be $1 worth of value in the storage and handling for every pound, but how much of that is going to disappear in the cost of the warehouse and the heat, the power, the light, the labor, and all of those things. So it's not a matter of just how do the fishermen get $19.64, although they can if they're developing all of the totes and the ice machines and landing and the bioprocessing plants and manage all the labels of the packaging and the distribution. They got to do all of those things to get $19.64 for a fillet of sockeye.
Thank you. It was just the thought that $19 is a lot to pay for. Well, there isn't a pound in a fish in a can, but it's a lot of those costs can be reduced if you put them into a can real early. And I realize that canned salmon is not like fresh or smoked frozen salmon. So I was talking about those pictures and my mouth watering. Yeah, you don't get that from canned salmon, but a lot of those costs, you're not going to pay anywhere near $19 a pound for canned salmon. So, but you'll process a lot more. You won't waste as much if you put them quickly into a can.
Yeah, what we find is that I deplore cans. Canning is one of the worst ways to present fish to the market, to make it market ready. It's kind of like a really good example is, have you ever gone to a pop machine and I don't want to drink that, buy one of those Coca-Colas or Pepsis or 7-Up, there's too much sugar in it. Oh, there's a bottle of water. Wait a minute, I'm have to pay $2 for a bottle of water and I paid $2 here for a can of Pepsi. What's wrong with this picture? It's because it's all about the can. And so when we talk about ecological or environmental sustainability or environmental responsibility, putting salmon into a can is in our opinion, not the most environmentally sustainable way of bringing salmon to the market. But the unique thing about a can is it's shelf stable for years. And you won't find many of our products, many of our salmon, natural salmon in a can, because their price points are somewhere between $6 and $8 a can. And so when you see canned salmon at $2 in Walmart or something, you're seeing salmon that's been purchased out of Russia or somewhere else, and it's driving that ecosystem to extinction. You can't afford to put salmon into a can at $2 a can. And so we encourage through our price engineering, our modeling, as we show the communities these prices, we encourage them to help that inform their choices. And so a really good example of that is a lot of our communities are switching to retort. You saw them in the packages earlier. A retort is simply a foil package that, where's our retort? There it is. That's a retort package right there. It's just like a can, only it's a lot cheaper to produce, flexible, it's lighter, and it hasn't got the environmental footprint of a tin can.
Thank you very much for taking me through that journey. It was just one of those things that get in your mind and sticks in your mind and say, well, damn it, you can get a lot more value and you won't throw as much away. Stick it in the can as quickly as possible, and a lot of those downstream costs won't be there. But thank you for the journey.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for that really good answer and explanation. That was really great. Thank you. So today we had talked about co-ops. Trista's here from the cooperatives first. We have Dave, who was talking about the River Select Fisheries Cooperative. So in the chat box, Trista, I don't know if you all noticed, but Trista had put her email address, her contact information, and she's like, if you have an idea for a co-op in any industry. So today, what we were talking in the fishery industry, shoot her an email just to like have a conversation. I think that's really great offer that you put out there, Trista. So thank you so much. It doesn't appear that there are any more questions. I mean, you walked us through, I think, some of the benefits of why a co-op for its members. You talked about some of those challenges as well, which were some of those last questions that we had. So I think you covered a lot of ground today, Dave. Thank you so much for your time, for being here and giving us a little insight into this industry, this very important industry. So, in the chat box, a wonderful presentation. So Heather, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. All right. So thank you, everybody. Trista, any last words?
No, I want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Cando and Innovate BC. I'm really excited for meeting everybody. And for those who are unfamiliar with Cooperatives First, we are a business development organization focused on building cooperatives. I am the Indigenous Relations Lead, so I work with groups throughout Western Canada, both within First Nations, Métis, even rural communities. So if you have an idea or any questions, and just we also have training available, governance training, incorporation support, business support, anything to help get your co-op off the ground. You just want to talk to an expert or get some ideas, give us a call or email me. My email is in the chat, or I can be reached at trista@cooperativesfirst.com. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to have you here, Trista. That was just poor grammar. Thank you so much for being here, Trista. We honor, all that you do and all that you support. So there's Dave's information. So if you feel like you have any, questions, any comments, shoot him a message, shoot him an email. So, because that's what this journey is all about. This is learning from one another. It's building our own capacity, talking about some of our ideas, asking questions is so important. So you have two amazing people in this co-op industry who could really answer any questions that you might have. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It got dark over here in Edmonton and Misquachimwiskaigan. So I hope wherever you are, I hope the rest of your day goes well, and that you just take a moment, stand outside, stand on the land, be with Mother Earth, just find that good connection. Be well, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.